what they want is people want to keep this going. And we're doing it to keep the small businesses open and to keep the workers paid. And we have a $250 billion request. The Democrats like it. The Republicans love it. And to be honest, I think something's going to be happening. I hope so, because this is a very popular program. It was really executed flawlessly. The first day they changed an application a little bit. But when you look at what Bank of America did and what Wells Fargo did and Citi and a lot of the banks, but when you look at what all of the community banks did, it's been really incredible. Well, we're negotiating with Democrats, and they should frankly approve it quickly. This is a great thing for our country. It's a great thing for small business and for the workers, and we're having a hard time getting them to approve it. I think it's going to happen. It should happen really unanimously, but they're trying to get things, and we're not too happy with what they're trying to get.
Trying to get things. That's what the Democrats are doing. We all know what that means, right? That they're allowing the pain of the American people, the small businesses that are going under right now, and the workers who don't have a paycheck, and they're using all of that as one big hostage, telling the Republicans, give us what we want or else. And they're supposed to be the party of concern for everyday folks. They're supposed to be the party of concern for the little guy and gal. And yet still, here we have this delay. In fact, Pelosi doesn't seem like she's even willing to call Congress from its extended vacation to deal with this issue. What the heck is going on here? Isn't this one of the more important parts of our government response? Remember, the shutdowns are effectively on all of us to execute. Right? The shutdowns are on us to do. We do the social distancing. We take the precautions. And the other side of that is the government has an obligation, because we are doing with that shutdown what we have been told, what we've been mandated to do by the government. They then take on the responsibility of making sure that there's cash in our pockets to pay us for this, and that we'll be able to go forward and be okay, right? So what's the problem, Nancy Pelosi? There's an obligation here, a particular obligation, a clear one, that has been created by the government, and there's not enough money as of right now to fund that obligation. Well, I suppose, because I always like to be fair, we should hear from Nancy Pelosi on this one. We should hear from her on why there has been this, why there still is, as I speak to you now, there still is delay from Democrats. This is the second time they've played this game, too. Media, of course, covers for them, changes headlines around, shifts around the words, makes it seem like this is a gridlock. It's not a gridlock. One side wants to get money to the American people who need it. The other side wants to stop that from happening until they get additional stuff that has nothing to do with getting money to the American people. That is just the truth of what is happening right now. So I guess we should hear she'll step away from her, $20,000 double refrigerators and her $15 a pint artisan ice cream. That was an amazing let them eat cake moment from Nancy Pelosi. Let them eat super fancy Earl Grey flavored ice cream. Now I'm just going to call out myself and say it. I actually really like Earl Grey flavored ice cream, so maybe I like artisan ice cream too. But most of you listening have a fancier refrigerator than I do. I can tell you that. Probably, I'd say almost all of you. Not a fancy fridge here. Here's what Pelosi says about why there's the slowdown. Play 5.
Again, we don't have any disagreement about wanting to help small businesses. They would like to say that, but they know that isn't true because we helped shape this program to begin with and are big believers.
Wait, but what's the problem then, Nancy? If there's no disagreement about helping, you like the program, and the money is necessary for the program to help, can't we just all put the pieces on the puzzle together and come to the obvious conclusion here? The obvious conclusion. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be a great thing for us to be able to say, yes, indeed. Nancy Pelosi, what do you really do? What would you say you do here, Nancy, or you are doing? I heard that was from a conference call that the Democratic caucus put together, and Pelosi also went on to kind of do her usual muttering about nothing, say that the problem is that she wants the government, rather, she wants the program to include more money for states and localities. So this is going to be a grab bag of cash for all of the different organs of the government, because the expansion of the government during a crisis is ideologically in line with what Democrats want, without even looking at the specifics about a program or funding needs or anything else. Just send more cash to the government, because remember, this is your money. This is your money that you are being given. This is your cash you're being given. But they wanted to go into the government's hands instead of just giving it into the hands of the people who are the ones who make the money in the first place. Right? The government prints money. The productivity behind it that gives those pieces of paper or those digits on a screen value, the productivity, the labor, the worth of all of it comes from you. This only is possible. The only reason that pieces of paper printed with a bunch of fancy ink and some images on them is something that has so much meaning in our society is because of the work that you are doing. The government just printing this stuff. This is the switch that the Democrats don't understand. This is what the left refuses to believe. That the money is not something that the government just hoards and has because it does and can spend as much of it as it wants, and none of it matters, and it's all just politics and the fat cats keeping it for themselves. No, the productivity and the economic activity below, the stuff that actually creates value, the reason this is a medium of exchange, they just reject all of that. And they want to make sure that more and more money goes into government hands so they can make more decisions about your life than they already are. And make no mistake about it, they are planning on continuing to use this moment in time as a means of expanding the scope, size, power of government in every way that they can. We've been seeing this all along. Lindsey Graham, for example, was asked about how, is the GOP embracing socialism? Here is Lindsey Graham's answer, plain 9.
There's a time for big government. Big government helped us get through World War II. That's when we had the Defense Production Act back then. Instead of making cars, we're making tanks and planes. There's definitely a time for the government, and we need to work on our broken unemployment systems at the state level. There's an all-hands-on-deck approach at the Department of Labor. But what is the most sustainable way to keep the economy strong? It's not perpetual big government. It's relying on the private sector in partnership with the government. So I'm okay with helping people who have just been devastated get back on their feet, but I don't want to have a health care system where the federal government decides who gets what when. I want the private sector involved in health care. And finally, you're going to see a breakthrough in the vaccine, not come from the federal government, but from the private sector. Don't destroy the goose that laid the golden egg when it comes to medical technology.
All the people talking about how, oh, look, everyone wants big government now. Yeah, if we got invaded by a foreign power, we would also want big government then, in the sense that it would be a national military response against a foreign enemy. This is very similar in the extremes of the situation to that. So of course, under those circumstances, you're going to want a large and robust government response. But this does not change the philosophical underpinnings that conservatives have. And in fact, what we see is that the first opportunity, if we really look at the scorecard of what the government's doing, let's talk about that for a moment. The government has been incompetent basically at every level in preparation, at every level. States and localities were worse, but look, Trump was not as fast on this as he could have been. It's a question of how soon he saw the data that really was the tipping point. But it could have been sooner. And I think that would have been true of any president, given the same advisors and the same. But if we're just going to gauge the way the government has done here, and we've talked about state and local too, New York, California, Louisiana, Washington State, what's gone on in these places, and you say, how could they have missed this so badly, and how could they have messed up the response? But they have. They don't operate on projections that have any accountability in them. They tell you to do this or else. They abuse power at the first opportunity. Government as an entity has not covered itself in glory during this process at all. it's a last resort for us because we have no other resort under the circumstances. But let's not confuse that with, well, because government has to be useful in pandemic response, they really would do a great job running our healthcare system too. You'll notice there's been a drop-off in libs comparing what this would be like if we had Medicare for all and what this would be like if we took the European approach to healthcare. Europe has done worse. Europe's healthcare system has been in worse shape. I mean, when I say Europe, obviously the major countries we're talking about, Spain, Italy, the UK. We have had better outcomes than they have. We have a lower mortality rate than they do. And this is a massive stress test of the system. So that, if anything, tells us that we have been on the more right track than they have with this for a very long time. And those who want greater government control of your healthcare system just ignore results in favor of ideology. But this is not showing me at all why, and I'm part of the movement to say, okay, government, step back, let people do more stuff. You got to ease up here. Yes, you got to give money to people that need money right now, but that's because you've effectively shut down their ability to make money. The government made the decision for the small business owners here. You can't take the risk to yourself. You can't take the risk to your family of going and continuing to operate your store or show up and work in the store. Not allowed to do that. So, of course, that's what I meant by the obligation that government has created. That you could consider to be an intervention in the marketplace from the government. So this is like a regulation they've imposed on us that prevents you from being able to support yourself at all. And then people say, oh, look, big government has to come in and save you. Yeah, because government effectively created the problem of the destroyed job in the first place. So this actually all lines up with what Hayek would tell you would happen under the circumstances. And it is not an excuse for a continuous expansion of government, and it does not break with any of the underlying conservative philosophy of how inept, slow, stupid, and bureaucratic government is, no matter how serious the situation.
Kinds of things that have to be done. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board.
Sorry, man. Biden had another moment. World War II and Nixon, Reagan. I know my Biden and my gurgling Gurgen are very similar, but at what point is this just too much? It won't. The answer is never for Democrats. It doesn't matter. I've told you the El Cid strategy here for the campaign is just put him forward. It doesn't matter what kind of physical condition he's in. It doesn't matter. Just keep on going. Biden's their guy now. You will. I mean, what the libs are going to have to chew on and stomach and swallow and just it will swallow then stomach. But what they're going to have to do to push Biden to victory, if that's really what's going to happen here, will be remarkable. Will be utterly remarkable. Because remember, conservatives, even those conservatives who very early on were skeptical of Trump, and there were a lot of us, conservatives were willing to say, yeah, I mean, sometimes he's a little crass, or, yeah, he seems a little thin-skinned sometimes, but, I like the policies, and I like the fight, and I like the fire in the belly, and, with Biden, what they're going to have to do is just, there are so many glaring weaknesses and really no upside. It's just everything Biden does is amazing. Biden is fantastic. He's just great. Whew. It's going to be challenging for them to do this, but that is going to be what they do. They will have to debase their own intellect. They'll have to debase and whatever morality they think that they adhere to. I mean, they're Democrats, so I don't know. You know as well as I do if they think that there's such a thing as a universal principle. But they'll do things like this. I mean, here's, for example, Amy Klobuchar, Senator Klobuchar, who I suppose is back to throwing staplers at members of her staff that displease her in the Senate. Here she is on the allegation against Biden. Remember, there's a sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden that now is the New York Times has written on it. Everyone's had to say, oh no, not CNN though. Oh, I'll get there. But here's what Klobuchar has to say about this. Play 3.
There were reports here in the New York Times and the Washington Post about an allegation of misconduct against Joe Biden. He has denied it. I wanted to get your response to that before we go.
He has said, and I agree with this, you got to get to the bottom of every case and all allegations. I think the New York Times, I haven't read all the stories. I read that one. Your viewers should read that. It was very thorough. They interviewed people. And I have done a lot of work on this. I actually led the effort to change the rules in the U.S. Senate so that it is easier to bring these cases forward and so that we have taxpayers not paying for bad conduct. I think this case has been investigated. I know the vice president as a major leader on domestic abuse. I worked with him on that. And I think that, again, the viewers should read the article. It was very thorough.
It has been investigated, huh? Really? Are they going to call for the FBI to look into this like they did with Kavanaugh? Remember that? Why don't you want an investigation? Why don't you want to find the truth? The FBI is going to investigate clearly preposterous allegations of a gang rape crew from an elite D.C. high school from 35 years ago? How's the FBI going to do that one? No one's ever heard of this thing before. No one's ever, there's no evidence of any kind except one crazy person spewing nonsense for obvious political reasons. But let's call in the FBI to investigate. Where are the calls for the FBI to investigate this one? Oh, they do background checks. Do they have to do a background check on Biden now or no? Can't they go around and ask all the questions? My friends, this is the most clear evidence that I can point to that our press is disgusting and a disgrace and should not be trusted and has no principles and has no decency and has no honor. That the corporate press, the elite lib media, and they're not elite. They're not elite in being smart or being good or being honest. They're just elite because they've inherited and they control with an iron fist these legacy media institutions that operate like the faculty lounges of elite universities, where being ideologically intolerant and stamping out anybody who disagrees with you the very first moment you see any independent thought is the way that they operate. That's how they do things at CNN. That's how they do things at these different newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post. Oh, where's the CNN? I want to give you the full numbers here. Oh, yes, here it is. The CNN versus the way they've covered Reid versus Blasey Ford, they have done, I think the final count, and I want to find this for you so that I'm sure. CNN has done 0 stories on Tara Reid. 0. Not a single story on the Tara Reid allegations. And now, just so I give you the full number, the full scope of how disgusting, how flagrantly awful they are, more than 700 articles they did on Kavanaugh. Math, folks. Okay, it's Friday, so I wanted to make sure we keep the show spicy. And that means that we could do a whole bunch of things, but one of them that'll definitely get the job done would be bringing in my friend Michael Malice. He is the author of The New Right, also Dear Reader, the unauthorized biography of Kim Jong-il. And he's got a show called You're Welcome, which you can subscribe to. It's on YouTube and other places. Mr. Michael Malice, good to see you, sir.
What's going on, Buck? For the first time ever, my head's bigger than yours.
I know. We do it that way. You know, the same way that you have the chairs adjusted so your guest is like a little tiny person? I do this so that your giant cranium, I can't even look at it. It's so huge. It's huge. But how are you? First of all, how are you doing? It's Friday. By the time people listen to this, they're going to be heading off into their weekends. You're here like me in New York, right? So you're in like ground zero for lockdown central.
Well, I don't like using that term in this context.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's been really bad for a while here. It's gotten psychologically for me better, but being a lifelong New Yorker, this really did a number on me for a minute there.
And what are you seeing about this that is, let's start with what have been the surprises for, other than this is worse than I think people, meaning the virus is worse than, I saw very few people that weren't saying this was bad before really what happened in Italy. That seemed, and then it was kind of like everybody realized that this was going to be really scary. But what have been some of the surprises or just some of your changes in perception about society, about the way people interact? I mean, what are you thinking about as we go through this process of trying to figure out how we move forward?
Well, there was an element of conservatism that I would tend to agree with that I think has been somewhat disproven. We all tend to have this idea, a lot of us, that civilization is basically like 5 minutes away from Lord of the Flies, and that, people are very quick. You see all those dystopian movies. When things break down, it's just the next day there's dumpsters on fire, literally, and home invasions, and it's the purge. And I had a few tweets about that early on because I'm like, okay, this is where we're heading. And I'm surprised at the extreme amount of civil rest. We've seen no civil unrest. There's been a protest in Michigan against Governor Whitmer, but that was hardly some kind of rioting, And I'm an anarchist, and a lot of, my anarchist buddies are like, oh, how would anarchism handle this, whatever, so on and so forth. And the point I'd make is a lot of these things that are happening are being done purely voluntarily. I mean, people are grumbling a little about the, level of whatever, this or that. But I think people are more than happy, for whatever reason or whatever you want to make of it, to be like, all right, we're going to do what we have to and white knuckle through this. And I'm seeing an enormous sense of community, especially through social media, because everyone's going through the same thing. There's a lot of sympathy for one another, a lot of kindness for one another. So, now who knows how long this is going to last. But I think, given that you're talking about worldwide, and given that you're talking about 50 states and how many cities and, different cultures within America, you would think they're going to react differently. I think that we've had this kind of uniformity of a response is in some way mollifying, and like, okay, at least we don't have to worry about these horror stories of, home invasions and things like this, and robberies.
Yeah,
or like subway crime.
Were you in the city when Hurricane Sandy hit? Do you remember that? Were you around?
I'll tell you a great story about Hurricane Sandy.
Go ahead.
So the year prior to that, there was supposed to be a hurricane. I forgot what it was called, and they shut everything down. And then it was basically like a thunderstorm for 10 minutes, right? So like nothing happened, and we were like, okay.
I remember that.
I was in North Korea.
People were filling their bathtubs with water so that they would have potable water, and then nothing happened.
Right. So I was in North Korea right before Sandy. And in North Korea, working on my book, Dear Reader, and so on. And in North Korea, they have a problem with electricity. And, there's a very famous picture of the two Koreas at night, or as North Koreans would say, the one Korea that's, split in half thanks to the U.S. imperialists. But the northern part of the republic is pitch black, and South Korea is lit up like a Christmas tree, or like Eric Erickson's front lawn. And when you're in a capital city, with high rises, and it's dark, where I was there, it's very odd, and it's especially for a New Yorker. And I came back like the day of Sandy, and I thought, okay, this is going to be exactly like last year. Who cares? I didn't prepare for anything. And then it hit, and then Lower Manhattan was in a blackout, and I'm like, I brought this curse back with me from North Korea. We lost the electricity in New York. So I remember that. But even that, the thing with Sandy was, I could look out my window during the worst of Sandy, and there were people. And not having the people here now really is jarring. And
this is what I wanted to try to bring up with you. And sorry, I had a delay there for a second. I didn't mean to jump on what you're saying. But the connectivity issue, right? Right now we have really pretty amazing electronic connectivity all the time in all the places, right? In Sandy, that was gone. And I remember seeing waves of people walking, because I was right at the dividing line where I was staying between a blacked out area and a place that still had power. And you had people who, some of them had to go through a totally pitch black building, a large apartment building, go down 20 flights of stairs in the total dark, maybe some, emergency exit sign or something, and didn't have phones to call. The phones all died over time. And there was this sense of, but then they saw the people, and it was just like, okay, human beings hug, shake hands, see, and that connection was reestablished, and you could just sort of feel the stress being, and everyone knew eventually the power would get back on. This is obviously a much more serious situation than that, but it is just, now we have total, like here I am talking to you, and we're going to have hundreds of thousands of people that hear this show, watch this show, listen to this show across the country. But I mean, other than the French bulldog I have here and occasionally maybe breaking social distancing for a few minutes with my girlfriend, like there's not, or not a few minutes, a couple times a week, sorry, with my girlfriend, there's not really a sense of human connection. I think that's what we're missing.
Yeah, the thing with Sandy is New Yorkers, I think, and people sometimes like to complain. And it's fun to complain when you know the situation is very temporary and nothing's going to happen. It's like with Sandy, exactly, like, oh, I just had to walk down 20 flights of stairs. But then you realize, you're in the middle of this like once in a century storm. And if this is the worst of your problems, that you have to do some cardio, you can hardly take it too seriously. You're concerned about maybe elderly people getting food to them, but you know that they're on it. You know that electricity is minutes away. Everyone on the street, it was having parties. I remember, it was just very communal, fun, like, summer school almost kind of situation. This is very different because what I'm kind of, I don't know about disturbed about is a lot of times you see people in the media or on social media talking about, oh, when we get back. And I'm like, I don't know what that middle step is looking like. And you're yada-yadaing the worst part. Because we don't have a cure for the flu. We all see those movies where there's a pandemic and then someone, oh, it's this pill that was in chocolate. It was there in front of us all along. We're cured. That's not going to happen. And at some point, someone is going to have to make the decision, how much of a threat can we deal with for the sake of reopening our economy? Most people are profoundly uncomfortable with making trade-offs. The idea that you have two bad options, and no matter which one you choose, it's going to hurt. And they don't think in those terms. They always think good and bad. Worse, given the animus between President Trump and the corporate press, no matter when he opens up this country again, the next day when someone dies, which will be inevitable, statistically, they'll be like, look, this person was fine, and then Trump reopened the country, and now little Timmy is on a ventilator. You could see, the headlines are going to be written right now. He can't possibly win unless it's literally a 100% cure rate, which is also not possible because so much of this, as you know and the viewers know, is a function of underlying conditions. So we have that nightmare to look forward to. So I think this kind of looking ahead that a lot of people are making are like, guys, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I don't mean in terms of the disease stuff. I mean in terms of all the corollaries with the disease stuff.
Hold on, Michael.
And there was a doctor on Twitter. I'm sorry.
It's all right. Can you hold that thought for 1 second while I just need to go to a quick break? We'll come back. We're going to come back with Michael Malice talking more about response to this and the media and everything else. Stay with us, team. All right, we're back with Michael Malice. Follow him on Twitter and also his show, You're Welcome, is very amusing, very insightful. I've done it a few times and I'm still kicking. Mr. Malice, so I didn't mean to interrupt, and we were in the flow. And we never have enough time. We're talking about anything, but I did want to ask if I could just direct you for a second to two areas of, because I like discussing the corporate media with you because we both don't mind throwing some haymakers where they're deserved on that one. The press's response to Chinese responsibility for this pandemic and the way the press has responded to the allegations of sexual assault against Joe Biden that are out there, given the way they responded to Kavanaugh and other things in the past, it feels like they have no more credibility to protect. So at this point, maybe just this is the way they're going to act and they don't care how much it looks ridiculous to us. What do you think?
Well, I think when you have a population like their readership, the true believers who have been trained since kindergarten that these people are the arbiters of truth, in many ways, the more ridiculous and more self-contradictory the story put forward, the better it is for your audience because they are then psychologically feeling strong for having this cognitive dissonance. This was very much a function of things like the Soviet Union and other countries where you have this maybe one party kind of media. At the same time, I've had this discussion with several people, like Molly Hemingway, off the top of my head, who's I know you're a big fan of, and I'm a big fan of as well. And a lot of conservatives had this belief that for a long time that the media is basically an arm of the DNC, the Democratic Party. And I think what we're seeing, I threw up a poll on my Twitter, and I was delighted at the response. I said, which would you rather have if you had to pick a choice of these two? And again, people don't like bad choices, but there's two bad choices from their perspective. 9 random Democratic senators for the Supreme Court, 9 random Democratic senators, or 9 random New York Times reporters. And obviously this is an unscientific poll, but 3-1 people chose the Democrats in the Senate because there's a realization that for conservatives, as bad as you might think, party hacks like Dianne Feinstein or some other randos might be, they do not compare at all to I call them jihadis without testosterone that work for the New York Times. For an example, there was that protest in Michigan. Governor Whitmer has the strongest, I believe, lockdown procedures of any state in the nation. For a long time federalism, let's have every state be the laboratory and have different states experiment. I think that's a good approach in general, especially something like this. People protesting. They're like, look, I can't buy seeds to plant gardens, or I can't visit my in-laws. This is crazy. And a reporter who works for the New York Times for their 1619 project, which is trying to rewrite American history to start with it being defined as the introduction of slavery, she had this tweet about how, I'm supposed to believe this is a coincidence that this is happening when deaths are spiking in the Black and brown communities. And I'm like, it's great that the mask is dropping, because you would never see any Democratic senator make a claim that demented and deranged. So I think kind of exposing, and you look at Governor Newsom of California, who's hardly Republican, Governor Cuomo of New York, hardly Republican, lifelong partisan from a hardcore Democratic family. They both are speaking highly of President Trump, or at least moderately. Prime Minister Conte of Italy, who's governing in coalition with the Social Democrats, went out of his way to praise President Trump. And then when you look at how the corporate press is talking, as if every death was not only his responsibility.
He ordered it.
Almost
It was like he's ordering executions. Yes,
and he wants it.
Yeah. It's stunning. I mean, I do think that you raise the point about the corporate press and how the mask is dropped. People keep saying that, the conservative media and there's now more opposition. I mean, that's a part of it, but really it's just that now they freely share their thoughts. I mean, that report, even Jake Tapper recently retweeted. He just couldn't help himself. I mean, he's one of the worst frauds because he still upholds that. You mentioned people being raised to think that like the Cronkites of the world and these people are so trustworthy and nonpartisan. It's a giant lie, and Tapper's in that mold. But he retweeted someone saying that President Trump is insane. And then he turns around and he goes, well, I just thought that was newsworthy. Well, no, they show us who they are and then they pretend they haven't, which I think is funny.
Apparently, he also thinks it's newsworthy to have Richard Spencer, one of the prominent leaders of the alt-right, be on his show, because that's to, let the people know. But then if someone is talking to President Trump, they should be run out of town on a rail. It's interesting you bring up Jake Tapper, because the Daily Show, which have been for a long time, one of these head agitprop outlets designed to kind of train their population to think a certain way, they had a segment on like stupid responses to this virus. And I always say that the corporate press is factual but not truthful. So, for example, if I went to the store and bought a ton of groceries and you said, Michael went to the store to buy oranges, that is factual, but it's not truthful. There are other things I bought, and that's an innocent example. So in their clip reel, they only had Republicans who were downplaying this forthcoming threat as if to imply that only Republican and the Democrats were on the level. The idea that you're going to be partisan during this, we talk about how, crime and diseases don't recognize color, but you really want to make this a Republican-Democrat thing. Jake Tapper had on de Blasio, mayor of New York, and he asked him, don't you think you encouraging people early on to go on the subway and live your life had an issue with this? So the fact is that there were plenty of people on the left who didn't see this coming. I don't blame them at all. And they will still put forth these clip reels to give the implication that
right. But this is important. Do you realize why Tapper does that? This is the Tapper move, and he's not the only one. So I'm not trying to make this about. But they'll ask, one real question once in a while of one Democrat, and then that wipes away all the propaganda reels, the stuff that you're talking about. They point to that, say, see, I had de Blasio. Yep. Of course, de Blasio was being a moron about this, so that you're supposed to get a prize for that?
But what I'm saying is it's amazing that The Daily Show can put forward this clip reel while simultaneously in cyberspace, there are infinite examples of people from the other side of the aisle, including Dr. Fauci, downplaying the concern.
Oh, yeah.
And if that is the other point is, I always say the corporate press has not a bias, but an agenda. This is something that's agenda driven. If you just had a bias and said my team handled it better than your team would, you can make that argument. But this is brazen lying by omission.
Yep. Michael Malice, everybody. He's always interesting, always provocative. Glad you're staying safe and sound, my friend. Let's do some YouTube chats or something soon. Put out some more content for folks. Check out his show, You're Welcome, which you can find. But just follow him on Twitter and on Facebook. Michael Malice is he's one of the digerati these days. He's operating in the cyber world. All right, Michael. Man.
Thanks, Buck. Talk soon.